Chapter 3 Lunch Break. Still staring at the faded world outside of his passenger window, Phonte tries to stay positive and focus on hope for his family because hope is all he has right now. Sitting beside him, Miko was also lost in her own thoughts with a look of careful contemplation displayed across her face as she continues driving the truck through the vacant side streets and alleyways. They travel like that for another 10 minutes before they finally emerge on the Route 171 heading northwest toward a small industrial park on the edge of the Willowburg suburbs that Phonte calls home. Minutes later, they pull up in front of a small warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence and razor wire as Miko brings the truck to a complete stop and hops out to approach the main gate on foot. Across the front fence is a huge white sign reading Graphic Icon Enterprises, and below that is a sentence, an industrial supplier of fabricated metal goods. From the passenger seat, Phonte watches Miko remove a ring of keys from her pocket that she uses to unlock and open the gate. Now, with the pathway forward wide open, Miko returns to the truck, gets inside, and drives straight back to the warehouse, where she parks near a loading dock and turns the engine off. Well, we're here. We can unload everything through that dock right there. After we get everything unloaded, we can go back out and try to find your mother and brother again before it gets too late, Miko says with an audible tone of relief as she pats Casper on the head briefly and exits the truck. Once out of the truck, Miko gracefully struts up a nearby stairwell, unlocks a door, and slides inside. Phonte gets out of the cab with Casper following close behind as the thick carbon steel door on the loading dock is unlocked and flung upward to reveal the inside of the warehouse. Again, Phonte is caught off guard by how attractive Miko is, despite her ragtag tomboy appearance. In a way, she kind of reminded him of Lara Croft from the old Tomb Raider video games, whom he coincidentally had a small crush on as a young boy. So you're just going to stand there all day staring at me like some lost puppy, or are you going to help bring all this shit inside? Miko asks with a coy smirk as she hops down from the loading dock and pops the truck's tailgate down to begin grabbing supplies. Phonte allows himself to smile as he snaps himself out of his dazed train of thought and walks around to the back of the pickup truck to assist Miko. After about an hour or so of unloading, sorting, and storing supplies into their appropriate areas, the two of them were able to finally sit down and catch a break for a moment. Now taking time to observe his new surroundings, Phonte quickly notes that the warehouse itself is broken into three main areas, containing an office space, a shipping and loading area, and a machine operator plant that covers roughly 100,000 square feet. Phonte assumes that at one point in time, before the vanishing occurred, that is, these two rooms were filled with hard-working employees, heavy machinery, and equipment, as well as a surplus of warehouse inventory. But now, it was merely just an empty husk of a building providing shelter for one young woman and her new companions. Miko mostly kept to the office space up front, where there was a functional bathroom and a floor plan layout like a small apartment that's well insulated and well suited for extended living as well. In the main warehouse area, she used a few of the industrial metal shelf racks to construct a small area for organizing her supplies and provisions in a consolidated area. Phonte had to admit, for a girl out on her own, alone in the apocalypse, she's managed to take care of herself pretty well thus far. So how did you find this place? Phonte asks Miko as she walks through the aisleways of shelf racks and catalogs the new inventory. Just kind of got lucky. Before I came here, I was just going from house to house squatting. After my dad was killed, I didn't think it was safe to stay in the same place twice, so I just kept moving. This was one of the first places I squatted in when I got to Columbus a few weeks ago, she says with calm recollection. When I realized this place was kind of built like a fort, I figured it would be safe enough to set up shop for a while, so that's what I did. Phonte nods with understanding and continues to survey the warehouse with quiet admiration. Well, I have to hand it to you. You've done a hell of a job setting up shop. I could tell from the drive up from the main gate that you've taken the time to lock this place down and fortify it pretty good. I'm definitely impressed. Miko laughs. Well, as long as the great Romeo is impressed, I guess I can die happy knowing my work is done now, she says with a playful roll of her eyes. But anyway, what's the plan now? Where do you want to start looking for your family next? Pausing to consider his response for a moment, Phonte contemplates his options and then quickly decides on a plan of action. First things first, I'm starving. I haven't eaten a thing since before the vanishing, and I think I'm going to gnaw my own arm off if I don't get something in my stomach soon. he says with a cheerful smile as he claps both hands on his stomach. Miko again rolls her eyes, but this time she gives a warm smile. After that, I'm guessing there should be about 5 or 6 hours of good daylight left, so I figure that's plenty of time to race downtown and visit my mom's office. I don't expect to find anyone there, but it's still a box I need to check off the checklist. Sounds like a plan, Miko says agreeably. Kitchen is in the office off to the right once you get up front. Help yourself to whatever you can find, but make sure you clean up your mess. If we're going to be roomies for a while, I want it to be clear from Jump Street. I'm not your mother, and I'm definitely not your maid. Phonte laughs out loud with genuine amusement at her response, and this causes Casper to bark several times as if he found the situation to be somewhat humorous as well. Ironically, you sound just like my mother when you said that just now, he says, still laughing. But it's cool, I got you. I'm kind of a neat freak myself, so don't worry. I was kind of hoping you would join me for a quick lunch break, though. Casper may be cute and cuddly, but he isn't that great for conversation. Miko audibly chuckles to herself as she shakes her head and shoots a smiling glance over her shoulder in Phonte's direction. You just don't give up, do you? She says bashfully as she finishes her inventory check and turns to face Phonte while placing her hands on her hips. For a fleeting moment, she allows herself to feel a sense of normalcy as she remembers how fun it used to be to flirt in her old life before everyone disappeared. It makes her feel good to know that even in a situation so bleak, drab, and dreary, that it's still possible to experience small moments of innocent pleasure. It's one of my gifts, Phonte replies, with the most charming smile his strong facial features can configure. And besides, it's not like you really have anything better to do right now anyway. Miko shrugs her shoulders as if to admit he has a point and allows her guard to drop a little bit. Phonte reads this body language as authorization to proceed, so he bows with exaggerated poise and extends an arm toward the office area like a theater usher. Well, please lead the way then, my lady, he says, still smiling. Happy to take point once more, Miko drops her hands to her sides and makes her way past Phonte walking toward the office. Phonte follows, with Casper trailing behind his heels as the trio enters the office area of the warehouse and makes their way to the break room, which has been fashioned into a small dining area. Off to the far right of the room is a table and a couple chairs surrounded by counters and cabinets that line 3 of the 4 walls in the area. A medium-sized propane stove bigger than the one recently recovered from Jacob's basement sits on the counter next to a functioning sink and dish rack. Over on the immediate right, there's a water fountain mounted to the wall with a painting of the solar system hanging above it. There's even a non-functional refrigerator in the room that has been cleaned out and fashioned into a small pantry cabinet that sits in between the catty-cornered counters tracing the walls to the left. I love what you've done with the place, Phonte says half jokingly, half serious, as he steps into the room and acclimates himself with the area. Again, Miko shoots him a playful look of annoyance over her shoulder, and Phonte grins with delight. These cabinets here have all the dry box food like oatmeal, instant mashed potatoes, powdered eggs, powdered milk, crackers, pasta noodles. You get the drift, she says as she turns to face him and points to the cabinets closest to the door. Those cabinets have all the canned foods, the spices, dried fruits, and some vegetables, she continues to say as she points toward another set of cabinets adjacent to the first. Dishes, pots, pans, and all that kind of stuff is over here, she continues as she points to the counter directly behind her where the sink and stove are. And the fridge is where I put the freeze-dried meat and stuff that I come across, which isn't as frequent as you would hope. What kind of freeze-dried meat? Phonte asked, curiously surprised. Mostly just bacon, but there's a little beef jerky and salami in there too. Nothing over a year old either, so it's all unquestionably fresh in case that was your next question, Mr. MIT, she replies as she goes and seats herself at the table. Phonte's facial expression displays comprehension and acknowledgement as he nods toward Miko and walks to the left toward the canned food cabinets positioned on the south wall. He opens the doors, and after taking a few moments to scan the contents of the cabinet, he pulls out a can with each hand and turns to face Miko across the room. Looks like we're having some good old-fashioned ravioli for lunch today, he says with a large smile as he walks over to the sink, sets the cans down on the counter, and fishes through a few drawers looking for a can opener. Oh, don't worry about me. I'll cook for myself if I get hungry, Miko says casually as Casper comes over and uses his snout to nudge her hand to let it be known he wants to be petted. Are you kidding me? Me and Casper over there would probably be dead as hell right now if you hadn't saved us from that murderous psychopath earlier today. The least I can do is make you lunch, and I won't take no for an answer either. Not waiting for any approval to be given from Miko, Phonte continues searching for the necessary utensils to cook a proper lunch. So tell me, young Miko, while you're sitting with me here killing some time, maybe you could tell me some more about all the different changes the world has gone through while I was catching some Z's. Miko smiles as she capitulates to the Siberian Husky's demands and pets him with vigorous enthusiasm. What do you want to know? She says, still smiling, as she tosses her hair to the side out of her face and sits back up in the chair to meet Phonte's gaze. After finding a can opener, Phonte opens the 2 cans of ravioli, dumps the contents of each into a stainless steel pot, and then places the pot on the propane stove to start cooking. Well, for starters, I know you've said that you haven't seen any other normal people for a while, but what about other animals? He asks curiously as his eyes flash toward his furry companion across the kitchen, who was still seated next to Miko. Miko tilts her head to the side, and her eyes look upward for a moment as she tries to think back over her journey so far. I'm pretty sure Casper is the first dog I've seen since this whole nightmare begun, but I do remember seeing a few birds in the very beginning. Other than that, no. I haven't really seen any kind of wildlife now that you mention it, she says thoughtfully as she returns her beautiful gray eyes back to meet Phonte's eyes. What about insects? Mosquitoes should be out of control right now as the summer season kicks off. Miko considers this for a moment. I don't think I've seen or been bothered by any bugs, but I can't be sure because I haven't really been paying enough attention to notice one way or the other. Been kind of preoccupied with survival, you know, she says, smiling with a slight tone of irritation detectable in her voice. Phonte considers the information only for a moment before proceeding to the next question. What about the weather? You notice anything unusual other than the sky being a pale gray color and the air tasting stale and stuffy all the time? He asks as he walks across the kitchen and retrieves 3 plastic bowls and 2 cups from the cabinet hanging on the far west wall. Again, Miko takes a moment to think back before answering. Only unusual activity coming from Mother Nature I can think of are a couple of earthquakes that shook stuff up a couple of weeks after everyone disappeared and the power went out. Earthquakes, Phonte says with confusion and befuddlement as he continues. Earthquakes in Ohio? Yep, only they didn't really feel like what I would expect an earthquake to feel like. It felt more like a shockwave that kind of shook reality or something like that, if that makes any sense. Miko responds earnestly as she leans back in her chair and interlocks her fingers behind her head. Other than that, it rained a couple times, but that's about it to my knowledge, though. Then again, I haven't really been paying attention to the daily forecast all that much, so there's probably more to know on the subject. I just don't know it. Phonte leans back against one of the counters and folds his arms across his chest as he ponders her words carefully. For a few moments, the room is silent as the ravioli begins to bubble from the heated convection being generated by the propane stove. A couple of minutes pass before he speaks again. Okay, one last question, Phonte says with a small smile as he displays the number 1 with his index finger on his right hand. Miko just rolls her eyes. Boy, you haven't stopped asking questions since I met you, so I doubt they'll stop anytime soon, she says with a giggle. But go ahead, ask your question, and then I have a couple of questions of my own for you. Fair enough, Phonte says with a slight smirk of contentment. Back when we first met, you said things get really crazy when night falls around here. So I guess my last question is, what happens at night? Miko says pointedly as she finishes the question for him. Phonte simply nods his head and uses both hands to gesture toward her in a way that says, you got it. It's hard to explain. And even if I understood what happened so I could explain it, I doubt you'd ever believe me anyway, Miko says timidly as she tries to find the words to articulate it. Try me, Phonte says with eager anticipation. Inhaling sharply before speaking, Phonte could see Miko trying to gather her thoughts as she scrunches her face with the first hints of nervousness he had seen since they met. Okay, well, here goes, she says, doing her best to hide the tremble in her voice. For starters, the crazy like that guy that attacked you this morning, they really get crazy. During the day when they come out, they're usually alone or in small numbers, and they're usually docile or lethargic unless you disturb them. But at night, something changes because they suddenly come together and they form these enormous herds that go on massive rampages of destruction that you wouldn't believe unless you saw them with your own eyes. Phonte stays silent as he grabs the pot off the propane stove and begins to pour freshly cooked ravioli into the 3 bowls to be served and lets Miko continue uninterrupted. At night, there's some of the most vicious creatures you've ever seen, but that's not all. In addition to worrying about staying safe from their onslaught of destruction, there are things that I can only describe as phantoms that show up out of nowhere sometimes too. Miko pauses here and looks at Phonte to read his facial expression, which is stoic and unreadable to her eyes. With the food now done and ready to be served, Phonte puts the pot in the sink, fills 2 cups with water, then places forks into the 2 of the 3 bowls and walks over to the table where Miko is seated. He sets a bowl and a cup on the table in front of Miko, then sits down across from her and sets the second bowl on the ground beside him for Casper as he saves a cup and a bowl for himself. Phantoms? Like ghosts or something? Phonte says curiously and without condescension of any kind. I know it sounds crazy, she says as her cheeks flush red with embarrassment and she bites her lower lip nervously. Not any more crazy than waking up to a city where everyone who isn't a murderous psychopath has disappeared into thin air, Phonte says reassuringly. Miko laughs at that. Well, maybe they're not ghosts, though. I don't know. They don't do anything like the ghosts on television, so maybe ghost is the wrong word. I've never been up close with one, and I always avoid them, so I could be completely off. Phonte nods in understanding as he considers her words while stuffing his mouth with a fork full of ravioli. Next to him, Casper can be heard chomping hungrily as he pays them no mind and continues devouring the contents of his bowl. And you've only seen these phantoms at night, right? Never in the daytime? Phonte asks inquiringly. So far, no, only at nighttime. When's the last time you saw one? Phonte asks as he plunges his fork into his ravioli again while taking a sip of water. Pausing long enough to swallow a mouthful of food, Miko responds almost immediately. It's been a few weeks at least, but that's mostly because I made it a rule to be indoors and not take chances out there after nightfall, especially with the time skips getting worse and worse as time goes by. Miko sees her comment pique Phonte's interest as she reads his face and starts to chew another mouthful of ravioli. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up these time skips. That's another question I have because it blows my mind every time I hear you say it. Like, how do you even know time is skipping? Phonte says with eager interest as he points his fork in Miko's direction accusingly. Too bad you already asked your last question already. Now it's my turn, Romeo, Miko says with a charming smile as she takes a drink from her green plastic cup and flicks another forkful of ravioli into her mouth. Phonte smirks over the table but says nothing in response as he waits for Miko to ask her question. So, what are you going to do if you find your family? She asks intrusively. On the floor next to Phonte, Casper was now finished with his meal and was proceeding to lick the dish clean. Phonte keeps eating for a moment as he considers the question. I suppose that's a bridge I'll just have to cross when I get to it, but to be honest, I like to think there's enough room here for all of us if we end up finding them, he says with a mild-mannered tone of doubt. Sounds reasonable enough to me, I guess. But what about after that part, Miko replies, from across the table as she slurps down the rest of her ravioli. I only ask because I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said earlier when you brought up the possibility of us eventually disappearing like everyone else. It's been messing with me hard. Phonte nods in understanding. Me too, honestly. Not knowing how all of this started in the first place is really bugging me, like an itch that can't be reached in the back of my mind or something. Miko leans back in her chair without taking her eyes off Phonte and folds her arms across her chest. Exactly. So how would you feel about trying to scratch that itch after we find out what happened to your family? I know it's a long shot, but the way I see it, if we can figure out why all this happened in the first place, maybe we'll be able to find a way to undo it and bring everyone back. Finally finishing the last of his ravioli and setting his bowl down, Phonte also sits back in his chair and looks across the table at Miko as he nods his head. That sounds like a plan to me. It beats sitting around ready to disappear like everyone else, that's for sure, he says agreeably. Plus, I've always wanted to save the world, so count me in for sure. Miko erupts into laughter so loud it startles Casper for a moment. Having said that, though, I think it's time we start looking for your family before we lose the daylight. If your mom's office is in the downtown area, then we don't have a lot of time to lollygag. Well, let's get this party started then, Phonte says as he claps the palms of both hands on the tabletop in front of him to emphasize his words. This elicits another eye-rolling smirk from Miko as she gathers her bowl, cup, and fork, then rises from the table. Phonte follows her lead, and together they rinse everything off and discard their dishes into the sink to be washed later. With that done, they exit the kitchen together with Casper trailing Miko's lead back to the main warehouse floor. From there, Miko briskly walks over to the loading bay door, pulls it shut, and locks it securely. After that, she proceeds to walk toward the racks of sorted supplies where she retrieves her shotgun and returns to the loading dock. Now, ready to depart, the two of them exit the rear door of the building, lock it, and head over to the truck where it's still parked in the first loading bay. Here, Miko says as she hands Phonte the keys to the truck. You drive. I don't know where your mom's office is, and it'll probably save us some time since you know the way around this city better than I do. Phonte smiles as he takes the keys in his left hand. It would be my pleasure, sweetheart, because with the way you drive, we'd be lucky to get there before next week. Miko just looks at him with a look of exasperation. Are you done yet, or do you just keep going just to be a jerk? This causes Phonte to chuckle out loud a little as he opens the driver's side door and motions for Casper to get inside. Miko doesn't budge and continues to stare him down with a slight look of annoyance. Okay. I'll chill. Don't rip my head off. Thank you, Miko says with a flashy smile of appreciation. Now fire it up and meet me outside the gate so I can chain it up. Yes, ma'am, Phonte responds as he hops in the truck, closes the door, and fires the truck's engine up. He offers her a cheesy lopsided grin through the driver's side window as Casper leans into view over his shoulder and looks at Miko with a grin of his own that's complete with both rows of teeth and a draping tongue. Miko simply shakes her head at the two of them and turns around to walk towards the gate in front of the warehouse without looking back. Phonte slowly crawls the truck down the gravel lot and escorts Miko to the front gate, where she re-secures the padlocks and jumps into the passenger side of the truck. Now feeling the space getting a little cramped, Casper hops over the middle of the seat and returns to the back where he didn't feel so claustrophobic and lays down. From there, Phonte guides the truck southward down the vacant service road as he retraces their path to one of the main intersections in the area and begins traveling west. All around them, bleak reminders of their tragic circumstances are on display as Miko surveys an overturned baby stroller on the sidewalk adjacent to her as the truck weaves its way through another car pile-up. Further up the street, she notices a small wooded area littered with several bicycles as they drive by a recreational park filled with the echoes of another life. It's the fishing poles still sitting by the pond as they drive by that make her think of her father, though. Can I ask you something, Romeo? Miko says somberly, while still looking out the passenger side window. Sure, go ahead, Phonte replies without taking his eyes off the road. What was your life like before all this happened? Phonte is silent for a moment before he answers with solemn care. It was actually pretty good, come to think about it. School was kicking my ass, but at the end of the day, I guess I didn't have a whole lot to complain about, other than your typical first world problems, I guess, he says as he turns the truck onto another road, heading southward again. Were you close with your folks? Miko asks in the same somber tone of humility as they pass a road sign for Havencroft, Ohio, spray-painted with the words, "Stay away, not safe." Phonte shrugs and smiles as he finally finds a stretch of road with minimal car congestion near the highway. I mean, yeah, I guess. My mom and dad got divorced when I was a freshman in high school, so me and my brother didn't get a whole lot of time to see Pops with his military postings, taking him overseas after that. So I was closer to my mom, but I guess I still felt close to my dad too, he says fondly. Yeah, I remember you saying something about being an Army brat because of your dad when we first met. You never mentioned anything about what your mom did for a career, though, Miko says. She is a lawyer, Phonte replies while correcting himself. And she spent the last decade or so building her own family law firm from the ground up, too. Miko shifts in her seat as the truck banks around another corner and her eyes shift forward. Interpreting her silence as permission to continue, Phonte obliges. I mean, don't get me wrong or anything like that. We weren't the perfect family by any means, But we were still a family regardless, even if we were kind of dysfunctional at the end of the day. My brother Jamal, though, he was definitely the most dysfunctional out of all of us. His ass was always in trouble for one thing or another, it seemed like. He says with a smile as he reminisces on the various times his younger brother did something erroneously stupid throughout their years of growing up together. Miko chuckles at the stories about his family as he continues to speak more and more about his life before the vanishing. With the drive being so tedious, she welcomed the chit-chat to keep her mind off the dilapidated and depressing scenery of the environment around them as they continue driving south. He goes on to tell her about his school life in terms of the projects he was working on at the time and the ideas he was developing with his think tank. He discusses his goals for the future, explains why he didn't have time for a relationship between school and his other commitments, and even tries to give a list of his top 20 favorite rappers. Sounds like you had a pretty great life before all this happened, Romeo, Miko says endearingly as she interrupts him around the 13th or 14th rapper named.